I hope you're all enjoying the weekend. I hope everyone's bought some caps. Some caps. The tea towels are a collector's item already, I'm told. So go and grab some tea towels. Some people keep saying happy birthday to me because I've got this happy birthday on. It's our birthday. I want to say happy birthday to Alcoholics Anonymous in Australia. Happy birthday. Happy 80th birthday. Because it's not my birthday. I'd like to welcome Sharon G from Borkham Hills to the podium, who will be our chairperson for this meeting, and I want to wish you all a great meeting. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon. Hi everybody, my name is Sharon, I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to the Steps 8 and 9 meeting of the 59th Australian National Convention, AA80. Woohoo! My name is Sharon G and I'm an alcoholic and I'm a member of Borkham Hills Sunday night. So if you're ever in the area, drop on in. The AA Preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. This afternoon, we're very fortunate. We've got 3 fabulous speakers with us who are going to share on steps 8 and 9. We've got Beck M from Perth, Chris H from Maroochydore and Jodie W from Woolwich. So I'll hand over to Beck to start us off. Thank you, Beck.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rebecca, I'm an alcoholic and I'm a very grateful, recovered, sober alcoholic through the grace of God and this amazing program, the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and so many things that I don't understand, but through the grace of God I'm here. And thank you to Darren and the committee for putting this on. I know how much work goes into it. And all the volunteers, all the ones in the red t-shirts, they're amazing, they're everywhere, they're really helpful. My job is to talk a little about steps 8 and 9, and thank goodness the steps are in order for a reason. Without that complete surrender, my sobriety date is the 15th of September 2005. And I believe that's a time when I really came to the end of myself. All those people that like to blame you for all my problems, problems that I never thought I could get over. And I was 42 years old, and I think at 42, I was just so childlike and so childish, and I had no idea. So I believe I was given grace, and I believe this step is about forgiveness. This is forgiveness, it's grace. It's amends, which means that I get to change, but only through the grace of God, and going through this process with a sponsor, one alcoholic to another. And I was going to share a little bit about, at first, where are we? To give you an idea, when we come into the rooms, and I identified, and I was also told I could use this as a review for the times that I do go off track, and I will. I mean, I might be around a little while, but I will. It's not if, it's or when. There's going to be some troubles. But it says to me on page 52 that I'm having trouble with personal relationships. Anyone else? I can't control my personal nature. Well, you might need to talk to my husband. I'm prey to misery and depression. I can't make a living. I've got a feeling of uselessness. I'm full of fear, absolutely scared little girl. And I'm unhappy, and I can't be of real help to other people. And if we fast forward to page 83, where we get the beginning of our step 8 and 9, this is how much work I need to do, even in my little big book, there's a power in these 30 pages that if I take these directions as outlined in this book, I can have a spiritual experience. I can change. I can come from that place of surrender, the admission, submission. I can get to this restoration step. I can get to reparation and restoration. And who would have thought that was possible? You know, when I landed in Serenity Lodge in Rockingham on the 15th of September 2005, I was given that gift of colour, and I believe that gift of colour was called hope, and that hope was for the first time, the old timers said, take the cotton wool out of your ears and stick it in your mouth, Rebecca, you know, and it was hearing our program explained. That was what hope was. And if you'll indulge with me a little bit, I've been agonising whether to do this or not because I love the history of how this comes together, how AA has come together over the years. And there was this story, I listen to a speaker tape most nights, and I do a lot of conventions, and I've had the privilege of meeting some wonderful people and having a great sponsor as well. There was, how we got our step 9 happened a long time before this all began, and there was, it's called the apology that launched 1 million amends. And what actually happened was, some of you, and forgive me if you've heard the story before, but there was one of our AA friends, Frank Buchman. He was a 30-year-old Pennsylvanian Lutheran minister, and he was looking after these children in the slums. And he was loving his work, and he had a lot of power, and he had a lot of love to give these kids. The 6 directors then said to Frank, you know, you're overfeeding them, you're spending too much money, we've got to cut the budget. And he said to them, he said, how can I give God's love to these kids and give them beans and rice? How can I do that? And they said, and then he quit. But he was miserable. He quit. He left something that he loved doing. And his family was so worried about him, I think his family gave him a little bit of money and he ended up in a place called Creswick in England. And he was going to go and see this man Myers and have a spiritual evangelistic experience and try and get his power back. Because if lack of power is our dilemma, he knew that. And he went on the wrong day. They say he could have been an alcoholic because he turned up on the wrong day. and he got into this church, and there was this lady, a woman doing a ministry, but he looked up at the cross, and instead of seeing blame, he saw the word I. And blame turned to responsibility. And for whatever reason, what happened, he lost all that hate towards those directors. He knew he was okay, but he knew he had to make an amends to those 6 directors back in Pennsylvania. And this was the letter that he wrote. I think it's here. He said, I'm writing, declared Buchman, to tell you that I have harboured an unkind feeling towards you. At times I conquered it, but it always came back. Our views may differ, but as brothers we must love. I write to ask your forgiveness and to assure you that I love you, and I trust by God's grace I shall never more speak unkindly or disparagingly of you. Those letters of amends spawned a revolution in Frank Buchman, a revolution that led to the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous. We might wonder how that happened. You know, how did that happen back from 1908? And so Frank travelled then into, I think it was 1917, he went into China. He went into China and he met a man called Sam. Some of you might know Sam Shoemaker. And he met Sam and he found out, and he'd had these revelations and he'd been working with people over the years. And he met Sam and Sam said, I've been holding some contention to you. He said, no, I also don't like working in China. And he said, why would that be? And he said, well, I don't like the Chinese and I don't like China. And he said, well, do you think they know? And what happened from that point forward was that he was able to make his amends to his Bible class in China. And whatever happened between Frank Buchman and Sam Shoemaker forged a relationship for the next 21 years. And from 1917, we fast forward to, I think it's in 1922, when they moved to New York, and no, they went to Massachusetts. They were in Massachusetts, and they were having this house party. Oxford group used to call it house parties. And this man, Jim Newton, saw all these pretty little girls going into the room, and he thought, I'll follow them. Off he went, and it turned out to be a house party where he met Frank and he met Sam. And he had such a revelation and such an experience by going through this admission of sins, submission to God, and then restitution or reparation, and then a guided life. And this is all the basis of Alcoholics Anonymous back in the day. He had such an experience that a few years later, he met Bud Firestone. And Bud Firestone he was able to have, when he met Bud Firestone, he wasn't able to help him have this, like a spiritual awakening, as we call it today. And from that point, he put him in touch with Sam Shoemaker, who helped him to have this experience. Now, from Bud, his father was so impressed after Jim had helped Bud get sober. He was a raging drunk. And then his father was Harvey Firestone, who had an absolutely, like Daddy. Daddy loves us getting sober, does he not? Our fathers? Yeah, my parents certainly did. They were delighted when I got sober. He said to Walter Tanks at the time, he said, let's go to Akron and have one in Akron. So this is all happening. They have their first 1933 Oxford group in Akron. At the same time, Sam Shoemaker is down in New York. Frank Buchman's down in New York having 3 meetings a week. And they're up in Akron, and who comes along but Henrietta Seiberling to this meeting? And from then, when Roland Hazard has been approached and in New York, and the story goes that most of us know, the next part of the story is that Roland went to Ebby, an old school friend. Roland went to Ebby, and within 6 weeks of Ebby getting sober, he said, I know, because you've got to get it away to get it. You don't get it away to keep it. So he went to Ebby, and then Ebby obviously went to Bill, and then at the same time, up in Akron, we've got Henrietta Seiberling, who knew Walter Tanks, who was going to get a phone call from Bill, and this first meeting was at the Mayflower Hotel. We can't say that from 1908 that these things don't all line up, and we're given this incredible program that started back in the day. And so we've got meetings in New York, meetings in Akron, and what happened for Bill, which is what's happened for all of us that have gone through the process of getting sober, Bill got sober when, I've got it here, he says, this was Ebby, he said, my schoolmate visited me and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. I made a list of people I had hurt or towards whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. So what I'm uncovering, discovering and discarding through that absolute chaos that I came into this fellowship with was the beginning of a possible willingness to let go of all my old ideas, to see all those blocks to that sunlight to the spirit. And he's been prepared and forged to go to that meeting, the failed meeting in Akron, Ohio, and meet Bob. So this is in 1934, and then he goes and meets Bob in 1935. And this is all 90 years ago, which is absolutely amazing. So I hope you enjoyed that little story. It was something that I see as how it's not by chance that we're here. We're not by chance, any one of us. It's not by chance. It's through grace, and it's through that ability to see that bondage, that pitiful despair, the 4 horsemen. I came in with absolute terror, bewilderment, frustration and despair. And to be standing here knowing I'm a sober woman of integrity is just chalk and cheese. There's just no comparison to what it's like having gone through these steps and seeing, I think at the end of my step 4 and 5, my sponsor said to me, she said, well, Beck, she said, you're a character waiting for, no, you're a defect waiting for a character. And it was true. And I think to some degree I had some humility because I knew I didn't know, which is perfect. And when I said to her, when I was first asked by somebody to sponsor them, I said, but I feel so inadequate. She goes, you are. What a relief. I'm inadequate. The program's not inadequate. There's nothing inadequate about this program. And I just finished that other little story that when Bill met Bob, he had an idea about the disease of this disease. He was with one alcoholic to another alcoholic, but he still went off to a medical convention and got himself, I don't know, talking about goofballs and goodness knows what else in that big book old language, got himself quite pickled. But when he came back on the 10th of June, which is our Founders' Day, 1935, 90 years of Alcoholics Anonymous in the world, that was our Founders' Day. That's why we're all sat here. Me here, Jodie and Chris, and the others are just sitting here. That's how we actually came face to face with each other. But I love in the 12 and 12, in step 8, if I can find it. The promises that we all know, quite familiar with step 9, but the promise that I love in step 8 more than anything is that it says whenever our pencil folders, this is our list after we've made our step 4 and 5, and cheer ourselves by remembering what AA experience in this step has meant to others. All those people, those beautiful people, the older sober members that came before us. It is the beginning of the end of isolation from our fellows and from God. That is a huge promise. That end of isolation, that place that we were all alone, had no idea what to do next. And then there was people that carried us until we could help ourselves and then to help others. And it does say that this step is about being of maximum service to others and fitting ourselves in and to become right-sized. Not too big, not too small, just one of many, and being that worker among workers. So through that step there, and in the big book as well. So what I'll share, I don't know how long I've got. I've done 10 minutes, and I think I've already done a long, long time. So my experience of going through the steps, very grateful that steps 1 to 7, any girl that I sponsor, I say to them, really enjoy your steps 1 to 7. It's all about you. We like it to be all about me. And then when we get to step 8, in step 9, we're actually really considering, having admitted that my defects are objectionable, knowing I can't remove them, but I have to with a loving, willing heart. You know, I love what Peter shared this morning about it's not how, it's who. You know, willingness, openness, honesty and open-mindedness. Without the willingness, I can't be honest. And without the honesty, I can't keep an open mind. So I just lost my place. I went back to Peter. So through that through that step 7, and then, as I said, I was a character waiting for my defects to be removed, and then it tells me in step 7 that it's only those that stand in the way of my usefulness to others. So it doesn't mean they're all going to go anyway, but I can make a list from my steps, and I've made a list. And it was funny, I was on the plane, thought I'd better do a bit of research and write some things down. And the only page that got left behind, because it's so torn and weathered and used, and is my step 8 list, my actual step 8 list. All the writing around it's all there, but the actual list. And I do think that for the most part there was only one on that list that I ticked, but I knew I hadn't done it, so I'm still dishonest. And I think I was at a wedding or a funeral and I hugged and I said I was really sorry and, you know, something like that. But in my heart, I know that's still one that still needs to be done, and it seems to come up around every time we do steps 8 and 9. And the beauty of step 8 is that it says it's ongoing, it's sometimes for a lifetime. I don't need to be worried that I haven't done this perfectly, that it's not all 100%, because God will show me the way. He'll make the crooked path straight. I don't have to worry that if I'm going to make a mistake, I'm going to make it until I'm going to keep getting things that are tough, you know, for me to have to work through. And we have had enough things through our life that are tough. And very early in the piece, this is just to give you an idea, if you make your amends before your amends are ready to be made, remember just being at home one day and I thought, oh, there's that step 9 part I could do. I didn't have a driver's licence, I'd lost it through DUIs and I had to go everywhere on foot and I didn't want to have to go all the way down the road to another chemist, but there was one just down the road. So I thought, I know, I'll go down there and tell them how sorry I am for the time that they had to lock me in there, call the police. I didn't pay them. I told them they didn't understand that I needed Nervitona Calm. I needed something. I needed anything off the shelf and I really needed it. And then they locked me in and then the door just slipped open a little bit and I ran away and I got away as quick as I could. And then anyway, the police let me off, that particular one. But this was this chemist. And I thought, I know. I'll go down and just say I'm really sorry and then I can go to the close chemist. So I go down there. Well, he was not impressed. This guy, Michael, he was totally unimpressed. My motive wasn't of sorrow. My motive hadn't come from doing a thorough step 4, 5, 6, 7. And it was selfish. I'm still selfish. Later on, when I was able to make that amends to Michael from that chemist, his daughter was on deathbed in New York through alcoholism and drug abuse. And I just looked like she did. And he could not bear it. So that was really sad. That was really sad. And those amends were received at that time, and I'm welcome to go there any time now. But that was what happens when you do an amends too early and it's not from the heart. Probably some of my biggest amends would be, I believe, to my parents. My father came to me in 2005 and he just said to me, Beck, have you had enough yet? Have you had enough yet? I'd been the revolving door of Perth Clinic, Hollywood Hospital, and Mum had been the Al-Anon black belt, and she said, don't go in. She's not, we've got to let her go. Mum knew enough that I had to hit my own rock bottom. Anyway, Dad said, God said, I've got to go see her. And he did. And he prayed. And within 2 weeks, I was in a 12-step rehab. And 3 days later, I got a letter from my parents. One side Dad wrote, the other side Mum wrote. And it was absolutely beautiful. They said, we know you're going to be okay. And they said, come home to us free, darling. And with my mother, I was able to, they were at every party. They were at every sober birthday. We just celebrated sobriety. My father got sober in 1986. So he had to watch me become him for 19 years. My mother died in 2015. They were able to come to my husband's and my wedding. We got married knowing that my mother had terminal cancer. And Dom never got to say goodbye to his mum either back in Ireland. And he was the last one to hold my mum's hand as she passed on to the next world. And he was so sorry. He said, I'm so sorry. And I said, no, God lines everything up perfectly. When my mum passed, my father had advanced Alzheimer's. A daughter, I could be the daughter I wanted to be. I wouldn't have been able to be that girl. All my AA friends would just surround him. Even when his Alzheimer's got to the end and he'd be saying his most favourite holiday he'd ever been was to the moon. He really believed he'd been to the moon. He flew Concorde from Washington to London and he thought he'd been to the moon. And they'd go, yes, Hal. Natalie even sang him happy birthday, Mr. President. Imagine that, Natalie with those big lips, lovely. But that dear man, he had Alzheimer's and he'd come to AA meetings. Sometimes I'd say to him, Dad, you don't understand. If I don't get to a meeting, I'm not going to be able to look after you. And he'd, come on, love, come on. We'd pack all the dinner up and leave it and off we'd go to Glen Forest, go to a meeting. And then in the end, the very last thing, I had a sponsor with me from Adelaide, another girl, and she got up at 2:45 in the morning to make a cup of tea. Who does that? And I saw my dad and I went upstairs and something was going on and he died in my arms. And the very last thing that man said to me was thank you. And this dear sponsee of mine from Adelaide, she was standing on the other side holding his hand. And that's the last thing he can remember leaving this world. I can be the daughter I want to be. I've got so many amends, and what I've been given at the end of my drinking, I wasn't able to have children through decisions that I'd made and amends that I needed to make in Darwin Hospital, and anyway, I've done some dreadful things. and I wasn't able to have children. But what's happened in AA and going through my having sponsees and doing my amends, that I've got more children than I need. I've married a man with 2 children that I love. I've got a little girl, Meadow, that calls me Nana Beck. I've got one of my sponsees' daughter is called Hope, and we've just spent last Tuesday, I think, at hijinks doing, games and swims and, with 2 little girls that are squealing with delight. I mean, that has to be a direct result of making amends. There's plenty of financial amends that needed to be made as well, and I was a bit worried about those, but I was just giving back their money. I thought it was my money, give back their money. It was quite rightly. And as I was going through doing those kind of more difficult amends, and it's principles, places and things and people, and people I've hurt physically, emotionally, spiritually and mentally, I was too frightened to do my tax return because I knew I owed money. Well, I got enough. I got about a $6,000 or $7,000 tax return. I put it in a bank account called Unexpected Gifts, because if God's the banker, God's the banker. And from there, I was able to pay back my fines. Enforcement took me 6 years at $20 a week to pay back all my fines. I was a very naughty girl. But through that Unexpected Gifts and with God's grace, I don't have to live this way anymore. It says that we'll be amazed before we're halfway through. And then we have those promises in step 9, which for us, or for me, is always a test along the way, like I can look the world in the eye through step 5. I feel a nearness to my Creator. And when I get to step 9, it tells me that if I'm painstaking, like if I really, really give this to God and I take direction about this phase of my development, I'm amazed before I'm halfway through. I know a new freedom and a new happiness. I don't regret the past, and I don't want to shut the door on it. I can comprehend the word serenity, and I know peace. No matter how far down the scale I went, I can see how my experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear, and I lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in my fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. My whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity leaves me. I'll intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle me, and I suddenly realise that God is doing for me what I could not do for myself. And I can't do that without you. So thank you for being here, particularly when I'm not all there, and I intend to stay. And thank you for listening. And I'll see some of you as we trudge this road to happy destiny.
Thank you, Beck. Could we please welcome Chris H. from Maroochydore Men's Meeting.
Yeah, g'day everyone. My name's Chris H. and I'm an alcoholic. Have a sobriety date, 20th December 1990, and I haven't had a drink since that day, and I cherish that date. I don't make a big deal out of it, but I cherish it because I got a good friend of mine said if you don't cherish your sobriety date, it'll keep changing, and I don't want mine to keep changing. Oh, if the boys in the pub could see me now, hey? Sydney Town Hall, hey? Up here, and they give me a microphone. I had to start questioning. I seem to get asked to talk about steps 8 and 9 a lot, and I don't know if it's a sign from God that I need to do more work in that area, but I take that as signs, and amends is always part of my daily reprieve. And funny thing, I walked in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 26 years of age, and I walked in and judged the hell out of everyone in the room, and made judgments about what this was and what it wasn't, and saw that funny stuff hanging on the wall behind me, and tried to make the best I could out of the 200 black bits that Pete talked about this morning. You may wonder why we know there's 200 black bits there, because I've counted them, and there's 200 there. When there's a boring speaker, I sit there and count the words. I'm working on the traditions, but I seem to get lost counting them because there's a lot more of them. And I saw those things on the wall there, and I I don't know what they meant, but they didn't sound good to me. They didn't look good. And the one that stood out, the one that stood out was step 9. And I thought, I'm in trouble here. I'm in big trouble because there's no possible way knowing I'm going to be able to try and, our first speaker talked about, it was originally called restitution, make restitution. And there's no way knowing I'm going to be able to restore any of that stuff because we've all got a past, I've never seen anyone walk through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, skip through the doors and say, I've finally found the people I'm looking for, I just need to clean my life up a little bit. We get here because, I've not only wrecked my life, I've wrecked everyone else's life around me. And as those, the 6 speakers that have come before me have so beautifully put, that alcohol wasn't the problem, was the solution to the problem. And I suffer with alcoholism, and it's an internal thing. It's not substance in a bottle. That's just a symptom of something that's going on inside me. I'm spiritually sick, but I don't know it. And so I looked at that and thought, there's no possible way knowing I'll be able to ever. It seemed like a Mount Everest to me to climb, to be able to make amends for all the things that I've done, the money I've stole, the people that I've burnt, the harms I've caused to girlfriends, the list was just endless. And so I ain't doing that. I'll do other stuff, but I ain't doing that. But apparently you can't pick and choose in here. The steps are numbered for a reason, thank goodness, and you can't just take what you want and leave the rest. Well, I can't. I shouldn't say you can't. Some people might be able to, but I can't. And pain's a great motivator. It seems to be the only motivator that I have in this show to get off in bum and to do stuff that I wouldn't normally want to do. And it's only been pain. It's been pain in sobriety that's pushed me to take actions that I don't want to take because I don't believe that those actions are going to fix my life. And I think Michael said it before, that I don't understand that if I do these actions, my life changes over here. And these actions have got nothing to do with what's going on over here. Call it whatever you want, spiritual acupuncture. But I've got to be for me, I've got to be in a lot of pain. I had to be in a lot of pain to get to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had to get into a lot of pain in sobriety and have a second surrender, what my sponsor called a second surrender in sobriety, where I just can't do it one more day at a time. And if the next person that comes up to me and says, just don't drink for one day at a time, I'm going to blow their brains out and then I'm going to blow my brains out, because it stopped working doing that. I was 3 years sober, and my wife, who had left me, came back and said to me at 3 years sober, I liked you better when you were drinking. That's how well I was going. And I couldn't argue with it because I liked me better when I was drinking. Because there's some kind of manageability in getting drunk and falling over and waking up and getting drunk and falling over. You take that away and I've got to deal with all the other stuff that's going on. And I don't do guilt, shame and remorse very, very well. And so the steps are designed to punch in my ego, allow me to get in touch with the power greater than myself that's been so beautifully talked about today, that it's going to enable me to accomplish what I couldn't accomplish for myself. And that's been my experience, I don't want to willingly do this. I hate being up here, but my sponsor says you've got to inconvenience yourself, Chris, in this show. And so I inconvenience myself, because I ain't going to grow if I don't step outside my comfort zone. And this is stepping outside my comfort zone. I can tell I'd rather be a participant down there than up here. But apparently I've got a good story on amends, and so that's why I was asked to speak on it, and I've had some great experiences with amends, and I've had some shocking experiences with them, because I've made a lot of mistakes in Alcoholics Anonymous. I can tell you, don't follow the early stuff that I did here, because you won't stay sober. I'm not the poster boy for Alcoholics Anonymous because I made a lot of mistakes. I'm a flawed human being that tried to get away with doing very, very little and wanted to accept very, very big, and it doesn't work that way, as Tony was talking about, that, it says half measures avail us nothing. So what, I can't do 50% and get 50%? Apparently not. Half measures avail us nothing. And so, I've got to put all the chips in, and that brings up a lot of fear, doesn't it, to put all the chips in. What are they going to get me to do? I was lucky I've had good sponsorships along the way that have some have been tough and some have, been encouraging, but they've said the right thing at the right time. I often say I've had 4 sponsors in 30 odd years, 5 if you count the idiot that was running the show for a while, that was me. I sponsored myself. don't recommend that. It's not a good thing, because I agree with everything I want to do, so you've got an idiot running the show again, and so that's not good. But I sponsor say to me, she called it the steps before the steps, and she asked me 5 simple questions, and one of them was, are you willing to go to any lengths? And she said, be careful before you answer that, because I'm going to ask you to do some stuff that you ain't going to like. Boy, she wasn't wrong there, I can tell you. But, as I said, pain's a great motivator. And she used to just laugh at me when I got in pain. I'd ring her up and she'd just laugh. Ho, 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 you ready to do it now? Yes. And so, I fiddled and fumbled my way through, and I made a lot of mistakes in amends, and I can share those mistakes, because I understand a lot more about it today, and the big book lays it out beautifully. If you want to know about amends, there's a whole freaking chapter on it. It talks a lot about what to do, what not to do, what to say, what not to say, and I failed at all of it to start off with. I ran around and said a lot of sorries to start off with and thought, that slate's clean now. So I'm the type of guy, I get sober and it's like, righto, we draw a line in the sand now. Chris is a good boy now, we're just going to forget about all that stuff and we'll move on. Apparently people don't like that. Your wife doesn't like that, that's for sure. And so, I had to sit down and start to look at amends, because I could not stand what was going up in my head anymore. And I got a sponsor today that says, Chris, if you've got any problem in your life today, any problem at all, it's generally unfinished business in the amends department. And I go, no, it's not. But he's right. It's generally unfinished business in the amends department. And I want to argue with that, but most of the time, well, it is, all the time it is. If I've got any problem or any friction in my life today, it's unfinished business. And AA's taught me that. So, I said a lot of sorries and wondered why people gave me that look like, yeah, right, you're going to do it again. Because amends, for me, is not about sorry. The lady talked about before about restitution means to restore, to try and repair the rip in the relationship, the tear in the relationship. And I ran around and said a lot of sorries. And I also ran around and said, sorry, I did this because you were like that. Apparently you're not supposed to do that either. Says it in the bit, never was I to discuss their stuff. Darn it, I can't even justify why I treated you like that. And I'm glad, and this is only my opinion, and you can take it, and I'm not, as I said, I'm a flawed human being. I've made a lot of mistakes in this show, and I'm glad that I don't assign parts. Because if I was assigning parts in step 4, guess when I go and make amends, who's got the bigger part and who's got the smaller part? Your part's going to be, and mine's going to be that. So Bill was very clever, and Tony pointed out in the way that he used specific language in the book about being very, very accurate about what he said. He said, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. Where was I? Selfish, self-centered. Because I'm telling you now, I took parts into amends and it just did not work. Because I was still holding on to the big part that you played in that incident that happened. And it was one on my old man. I could not forgive my old man for a long time. He's 93 and I'm 60, and there's been 20 years where he hasn't spoke to me. And a lot of it was my fault. I stole money from a family business and, in sobriety. That's a hard thing to do, and then you've got to stand up from the podium and say, it's all about honesty. It soon gets to you, I can tell you, because the worst person in the world knows me. And you can only kid yourself for so long. And I was dying. I was dying at 10 years of sobriety, and I met that woman that was mean to me, but she was, probably saved me. Well, she did save me life, and she looked at me, and the first words that were out of her mouth, how long have you been sober? And I went, 10 years. She goes, I wouldn't want what you've effing got. Because I was lying, I was cheating, I was stealing, all I'd done was put down the drink. And, as been spoken about today, the main object of this show is to find a power greater than yourself that can do things that I can't do for myself. And, I couldn't stop that behaviour. As much as I tried to be a good person, I couldn't stop that behaviour. And I think, not to cross here, but Tony's right. I think, the change happens in amends. The change happens with all those defects of character, because now I get my feet hit the road, now I've got to go out and I've got to act like someone who's been changed with the help of God. I can't make amends without God. I can tell you now, I walk up to the door, I want to run away. I sit in the car and pray my ass off for, an hour. Give me the strength. I can't do this. And, with that one with me dad, I was having a lot of trouble with financial insecurity and hanging on to, when I just could not get free of financial insecurity. And she sponsors they're like freaking jiu-jitsu, aren't they? They go, you'll never be financially free, Chris, until you pay all the money back. That doesn't make sense, does it? I've got to give them money and it's going to fix my financial insecurity. How does that work out? It's going to make me more financially insecure. But apparently I'm giving them their money back. I'm not giving them my money. News to me. And so I was able to do that, years down the track. And there's a whole story to it. I've got 25 minutes and I ain't going to be able to... That story in itself would take 25 minutes to tell you. But that I went and paid that money back and my financial insecurity slipped away. And then I started paying back, stealing from milk bars and taking money. And I learned a valuable lesson out of that. That was that, I can't take nothing. I cannot, when it comes to money, I cannot take a dime off anybody. If someone overpays me, I've got to go. I've had bosses that have overpaid me. I've rang them and said, you give me too much money. They go, don't worry about it. I said, no, you need to take it back. Because I am the greatest justifier of all time. If I start saying, it's all right this time, guess what? That $5 becomes $100, then it becomes $1,000, and then the list goes on and on and on. So I've got to be very, very careful about justifying any of my behaviour. And I got free of that. And they talk about, amends to the family. Someone mentioned this morning about, living amends, and then there's the face-to-face and written amends. I think they go hand in hand. It's my opinion. I think, I'll be forever, I've made formal amends to my wife and kids and close family, but I think I'll spend the rest of my life making living amends. I've done the formal thing, I've sat down and I was taught a way to do it, and, I think it sort of, they say there's no instructions to step 8. There's actually really good instructions. I missed where it says to make amends to them all at the end. Apparently all means all, not just the ones that you want to do. All means all. And I missed that bit because there's a trap in step 9 and the trap, our first speaker read it out. And the promises can be a trap because they start to materialise before you're halfway through. Before you're halfway through amends, they start to materialise, and it's very, very easy to take your foot off the gas and slow down. Geez, I'm doing all right now. People are starting to talk to me. People are inviting me back. I feel like I've tapped into something here. I feel like, this is what they mean by this inner resource. And I suddenly realise that God's doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. All those promises start to happen, and I thought, I can just chill now. It wasn't a conscious thought, but my alcoholism's cunning, baffling and powerful, and it will trip me up at any chance it gets. And I've got to be very, very vigilant about that, Faith without works is dead. I can sprout it all I like, but if I'm not putting the action in, it's useless. And, I got caught with that. And so step 8, talks about prepare and then execute. And I think, the whole bit written about step 9 is all about preparation for me. It talks about what we do say, when we say it, how to go, what frame of mind I should be in there when I go to make amends. I don't just run around to relieve me of the guilt. You know, and I've done that too. I want to relieve me of the guilt, so I'm going to dump it all on you. And that, you've got to go back and make amends for the way you made amends, and that's not fun either, I can tell you. So you want to get it right. And so, you know, I'm very, very clear on how to do it today. I don't go out and do it on my own. I consult God and I consult my sponsor. And I write it out, what I'm going to say, and I make an appointment. And that's just stuff that works for me, because I've banged on people's doors. They're not even expecting me. I'm here to make amends to you. You know, my sponsor today says, you know, Chris, we've always got to consider, if the tables were turned, how would you like to be treated? Always consider it from their perspective. And so that dad one, you know, I after making that amends, you know, and we reconciled, and then it all fell apart again, and he didn't talk to me for another 10 years, and I go, well, what do I do? You know, and my sponsors are good. They got you know, they got great ways of, you know, I think it's, well, if he's not talking to me, there's nothing I can do about it. He says, oh, hang on a minute, let's look at that. I hate it when he says that. And so what he got me to do was send me dad a present on his birthday, on Christmas, send him a card with a present, and just send him stuff on special days. And so I did that begrudgingly, because I was still assigning parts to, he's hurt me more than what I've hurt him. See how when I assign a part to something, I'm automatically, you know, I'm never going to get free of that. And that's just something that I've learned, you know. I read something the other day that said, you know, if I can't forgive, I'm breaking the bridge that I need to cross. Isn't that true? If I can't forgive, I'm breaking the bridge that I need to cross here into the promised land that it talks about. And it's a hard thing, isn't it, when people have really wronged us? But again, I'm signing parts to that. And so I did it begrudgingly, you know. And it's hard to find a freaking card for your dad, because it's got all that, I love you, Dad, you know, from your wonderful son, blah, blah, blah. I ain't buying one of them, I can tell you. I'll just buy a blank card and say, happy birthday, Chris. That's as good as I got. You know, and over the years, I've done that for years. Done it for years. And I noticed the change when I was able to, you know, years down the track, when I was able to go into that newsagent and buy a card and say, and it says, you know, Dad, I love you, from your son. I went, I bought that, what? But that's how God sneaks up on us in this show. I think Michael talked a bit about it. You know, I don't understand by sending him a card that I'm going to change, but slowly I started to change and started to see him in a different light, that he did the best he could with what he had. And, you know, I've got 5 minutes, I think. I'll tell the story. I've told it before, but, you know, it means a lot to me. You know, I hadn't seen him for 10 years, and I was in Melbourne because I live on the sunny coast now, and I rolled up to a shopping centre, and guess who's sitting at the coffee shop in the shopping centre? My dad. Now, I don't know what to do. I'm looking and I'm walking around and I'm watching, I'm looking at him, and so I do what I've been taught to do in here. I rang my wife. What do I do? She said, I don't know. Call another member. And so I called, you know, my best friend in AA, Peter, who spoke this morning. So I don't know what to do, Pete, you know, because I've been schooled that way. If I don't understand something, I ask for help. I could never ask for help my whole life, but Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me to ask for help when I'm unsure of something, ask somebody. And Peter said, you know, what do you got to lose? And I didn't just get off the phone and go marching up to him. I can tell you, I got on my knees and I prayed. In the middle of the shopping centre, people are walking past me going, look at what's this religious nut doing? But you know, God's either everything or he's nothing, is he? You know, and I was given the strength to go up and sit down and talk to him, and it got a bit heated to start off with, but, you know, we agreed to disagree, and we sat there and talked, and I gave him every opportunity to tell me to bugger off, but he said, well, you're here now, and slowly that relationship built. After 10 years, now, if you'd have said to me that was possible, I would have laughed at you. And it was hot and cold at times, and he's just been moved into a nursing home. And he rang me, and he never rings me, but the last year he's rang me at Christmas, he's rang me on my birthday, and he rang me. My old man's from a tough school, I can tell you. He was brought up in Richmond and Collingwood, and he said, I'm sorry. And my head's going, you say you frickin' should be, you old. But that's not what it's all about, is it? You know, he said, I'm sorry, you know, I never meant to turn out the way it did. I lie awake at night worrying about it. And I can't believe the words that come out of my mouth was, don't worry about it, Dad, that's in the past now, let's just move on with our lives. And I go and visit him. And even that's a miracle in itself, because, you know, I hated that guy for a long time. And I went there before we came away at Easter here, and went and seen him, and he calls me, when I was young, he used to call me Chrissy when I was his best friend. He'd go, and I knock on the door and he goes, Chrissy, good to see you, come in. How is that possible? How is that even possible? You know, and I can go there and sit there, and he's got a bit of dementia, and he tells me the same thing over and over and again, and I just act like he's telling it to me for the first time, and because I was taught to be kind and loving in this show, regardless of what's going on. Be kind and loving. Be the best example of Alcoholics Anonymous that you can be. And I think I was wearing a shirt that says ex-jaywalker, and he goes, what's that? What's an ex-jaywalker? And I'm able to sit there because he knows I'm in AA. And I didn't give him a very good example of Alcoholics Anonymous in those early teen years, I can tell you, because nothing changed. None of that behaviour changed. I'm happy to say it's changed today. You know, I'm a much better version of what I was that walked through. And thank God I'm a much better version of the guy that walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, because if I wasn't, that mean this show doesn't work, and it works. But you've got to be prepared to do it. And for a long time I didn't do it. And I'll finish on this, you know, everyone says that, don't they? I sometimes sit here and I take for granted, you know, it's been bandied around that it's 80 years old in alcohol, you know, it's 80 years in Australia, you know, 90 years in America, you know. And I just told you the story, my dad's 93, so Alcoholics Anonymous has only been around for the time my father's been on this planet. We've been here for, well, they're debating how long we've been here. We've been here for a long, humans have been here for a long time. They've been squashing grapes for a long time. My sponsor tells this story. I sometimes take for granted that we're sitting in a very, very small window of time in the history of man that's had a place like this that we can come to get help and to get well and to go out there and help other people. 90 years is not a long time in thousands of years. I'm so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous. It's gave me a life that I could not have even possibly dreamed of. One more thing. We see things differently. Peter talked about, you know, that we wake up in here. We wake up spiritually. We look at the world very, very differently. And I watch stuff, you know, I don't watch a lot of TV. I watch a lot of series and documentaries, and I'm not religious in the slightest. I'm a heathen, if anything, but I don't close my mind to any spiritual stuff. I'll sit in a church and listen to someone give it, because I love that stuff. It's the big book talks about don't be prejudiced against any spiritual. Ask yourself what it means to you. And I'm watching this show called The Chosen, and it's about Jesus. Now, I'm not here to pump Jesus down anyone's throat. It's actually a really good series. And one of the disciples, Simon, is the fisherman. And they're following Jesus. And it just dawned on them one day. They're going, why us? Why did he pick us for? And they said, well, Simon, go and ask him. And so he walked up to Jesus and he said, why'd you pick us for? I'm a thief. I'm a gambler. I'm a cheat. I'm a liar. You've got a tax collector. We're all... And he goes, because well people don't need healing.
Thank you, Chris. That was great. Please help me welcome Jodie W. from Woolwich, New South Wales.
Hi friends, I'm Jodie, I'm an alcoholic, and I have a tissue, for those of you who know me. Thank you to the committee. I know firsthand how much work and effort has gone into this weekend, and I think it's magnificent and marvellous to be here. I was here in 2002. He's gone. Darren, the MC, is my husband, and we had our first locking eyes at Town Hall in 2002, and I asked him out shortly after that, I think, or 2001, was it? Yeah, 2001. And and this year if we make it to June 18th, we'll be celebrating 20 years of being married, which is a bloody miracle for two alcoholics like us. So thank you. It probably does deserve a clap. I was going to say it doesn't deserve a clap, but my sober date is the 22nd of June 1996. It's still remarkable to me that I'm still here after 28 years. There he is. I was just saying we locked eyes here many years ago. Thank you, darling. So 22nd of June 1996, I came in here at the age of 24. A few months before that, I got here knowing that I didn't know it, but I found out when I got here that I was completely powerless over alcohol and that I'd been trying to control my drinking for a really long time. But it took me a few months before I realised that I was powerless over drugs as well, and that's part of my story. And I got clean and sober on the 22nd of June 96. I got sober in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. It's where I drank as well, and when I came into AA, I didn't know what I was going to find here. I had no clue, but I just knew that I couldn't do what I was doing any longer. And the last night of drinking for me wasn't a particularly dramatic event. It was just another night when I had all sorts of plans that didn't turn out the way I expected them to. And that's what alcohol did to me. Once I had one, I couldn't tell you where I was going to end up. And it wasn't always disastrous, but I always woke up the next morning with the guilt, remorse and shame that many of us talk about coming in here with. And I'm a blackout drinker. I didn't black out every time I drank, so I thought I had some control. But I found out when I got to AA that control means you can control it all the time, not just some of the time. And I got here and I found myself amongst people that I identified with from my first meeting. I knew that one was too many and 100 was never enough. And I found out that if I didn't have the first drink, I couldn't get drunk. And that was a revelation. And I'd considered myself quite clever. I did well at school. And it had never occurred to me to not have the first drink until I got to AA. I haven't had a drink since my first meeting. And so I came in, I just happened to find myself in a home group where people were really enthusiastic about being sober. There was lots of young people there. They were doing the steps, they were talking about sponsorship, and I got a sponsor. I didn't know that you couldn't do all those things. I didn't know that you could hang around in AA and not do the suggestions. I just kind of came here and did what was suggested to me. And so I got a sponsor and I got a home group and I got a service commitment, and my home group was Into Action at Waverley, and there was all these really happy, excited people, and it kind of made me want to vomit, but I was really drawn to it at the same time, that sort of paradox. And the enthusiasm was engaging but terrifying at the same time. And I started working the steps with a sponsor, and she was the one that, got me to get honest about the drugs, and I changed sponsors about that time. She suggested that someone else would be better helping me, which was very kind and humble of her. But I went and got another sponsor and started working the steps with her, and we got through step 4 and 5. It took me about 9 months. I don't recommend that. I do things much more quickly with my sponsees these days if I can, but that was just my journey, and I kind of ran through 6 and 7, didn't really know what they were, and they didn't make a whole lot of sense. And I started making my amends because I was keen to tick the boxes. That was my thing, you know. I'll tick all the boxes, I'll do all the work, I'll get better, and then I'll be okay. Then I won't live with this spiritual malady anymore, this disease. And you know, in all honesty, it served me well in the beginning. I didn't know any better, and I started making, you know, I had been, apart from having a problem with alcohol and drugs, I also was a compulsive gambler before I got to AA, and so I had lots of financial amends to make. I wasn't a gangster or anything, but I'd got myself into all sorts of credit card debt and other debt before I got here, and so I had to start paying people back, and banks back, and my grandfather lent me a lot of the money to do that, and then I had to pay him back, and you know, I did it over about 3 or 4 years, and it was incremental little payments along the way. I kind of wanted to do some grandiose gesture where I could come along with, you know, like cash or a cheque or something, but I had to do it bit by bit. And I was living with him at the time. I had moved in with him when I got sober, and I finally, after 4 years, made that last payment to him, where we kept a little ledger, and I've got it here with me today. I have that page, that double-sided page of me paying him back. It's laminated now. I carried it around. I actually found it in 15 years after this happened, which is part of my story. But yeah, we had this moment together where I paid him that last payment, and he didn't really understand alcoholism. He certainly didn't understand my journey in AA. You know, he just thought I should stop drinking if it didn't work for me. But he could see what was happening to me. I was the only person in my family that paid him back any money. And we had this moment when I made that last payment to him, and we wrote balance nil, and we both initialed this piece of paper, and I felt like an adult for the first time in my life. I was 29 years old, and he looked at me like an adult for the first time in my life. And many years later, and we shared that moment, and you know, things happened and life went on, and I ended up working in my family business for 20 odd years that he had started, and one thing and another, there was some serious conflict in my family, and as part of an amends process 15 years later, I was sued by another family member, or threatened to be sued. And just around that time, I found this little piece of paper when I was going through that process. And I'd been at a Bob D and Polly P workshop, and I'd heard Bob D say that, you know, if you've got a resentment with someone and you've done all the work on it, then you have to either forgive them or make an amends. And I had the resentment with this person who was suing the family, and I just knew that it was a spiritual axiom that he'd just shared, and that I had to try and forgive this person or make an amends. And I didn't know what that looked like because I'd been praying for forgiveness for a long time. And so I decided that it probably needed to be an amends. And I was not willing to make any kind of amends to him. He was an arsehole. And I couldn't believe that that's what God wanted from me, but I'd had enough experience in AA by then to know that that I'd heard a spiritual truth that day, and I wanted freedom again. I wanted freedom from this resentment. It was one of those resentments where if I'd see him in the street, I'd hide behind a car because I didn't want to have to look at him or make eye contact, and I didn't want to be hiding behind cars at nearly 20 years sober. And And so I prayed for the willingness to be willing, and I asked God to show me what it was that I needed to do, and I was hopeful that it would be palatable as well. And at that time, I think we were moving house or something, and I found this little piece of paper that was my amends process with my grandfather, and it felt like a sign from God. And it'd been, it's like, seriously, it's a little piece of paper that had been missing for 15 years and shows up when I'm praying for the willingness to make this amends. And long story short, eventually the opportunity came for me to buy that person out of our family business and at a reasonable price, and it was like a complete God job, a miracle that all that happened, and it unfolded in a very pleasant and palatable way, which I wasn't expecting. I thought it was going to be a fight to the death, but it wasn't at all. And it was just like God showed up and my angels showed up, and it all happened really smoothly. And there's been a number of those experiences in my recovery. I feel like I'm not a big book technician. I'm not someone who, can quote pages of the book that are appropriate to different topics. But I certainly feel like I've lived a full and abundant life since I got here, and not without its, painful challenges. And, some of you may know me, and, at 4 years sober, after I tried to make amends to my father, he took his own life. He couldn't live with alcohol and he couldn't live without it, and he had his own rock bottom, and got caught drinking at work and was suspended and couldn't go back to work, just couldn't face the guilt, remorse and shame that he had about that, and he ended up taking his own life. And at that time I found out that I was a secret and that they had moved away, and my parents had separated when I was very young. They'd moved away and nobody knew about me, where they'd moved to, and I had what I felt like was a pretty justified resentment against my stepmother, who was still around. And it turned, a number of events happened, and I felt I was really harmed by some behaviour that happened around his death and the funeral, and it felt like a justified resentment. And I was terrified. It was real trauma, and I didn't know how God was going to fix that for me. I just knew that I had enough examples in my life and enough examples of people around me that I knew something would happen, but I didn't know what it was, and I just kept praying. And the resentment showed up as debilitating fear, and I couldn't have a relationship with that woman. And another friend of mine ended up reaching out to me a couple of years after Dad's death and saying that his sister had killed herself, and he needed some support for him and his mother in that process, in the grief journey that they were on. And so I went looking for help for them, and somehow ended up in a bereaved by suicide support group and with them. Even though I didn't think I needed it, it was 2 years on, I'd had grief counselling, all this sort of stuff. And I went to the bereavement group, and there was a whole bunch of women there that had all lost their partners to suicide, and we met, I think it was every week or every fortnight, and I got to hear them share their stories, and I got to hear them talk about the pain and the real grief that they experienced, and how much shame they had about the fact that they hadn't helped their partners. And somehow in that process I heard my stepmother, and I forgave her for all the shitty things that she'd done after Dad died, and the resentment was removed, and I wasn't scared of her anymore, because I learnt to love her through loving these other women that I was in this group with. And it felt like a really profound, organic moment that God had put in my life, because I was trying to help someone else, and somehow I ended up getting this incredible healing myself. And it was remarkable, I guess the thing that's hardest to talk about with steps 8 and 9, for me is the current stuff, is the stuff that I too have been asked to speak on steps 8 and 9 recently a number of times, and I go, oh, what does that mean? Yeah, it's the stuff, it's the day-to-day stuff, it's the stuff with my kids, it's the perimenopausal/menopausal 53-year-old woman coming home from a really hard day at work, losing my doo-doo with everyone in the house, and taking out my bad moods and my, just bad day on them, and making everything about them and their, it talks about it in the 12 and 12 in step 8, micromanaging everything that's going on in my home, thinking that if I control everything around me, then I'm going to feel okay. And it doesn't work. And I end up hurting the people I love the most. And I've had to really, especially be, I know I don't want to make all the men in the room uncomfortable talking about perimenopause and menopause, but it is a big thing. And there's a whole lot of women here too, and we're all going to go through it, whether we like it or not. But the experience has been that, I've had to take perimenopause to God too, not just my alcoholism, and get the support and help that I needed with that. And also, show up for my kids and tell them when I know I've been unreasonable, and teach them about what recovery looks like. And, they're not alcoholic and addicts yet. They haven't had a drink or a drug yet either, as far as I know. But I do want to be an example of them, for them, of what being a loving and kind human being is. And I have had so much love and kindness given to me here, and I do feel like I'm able to transmit that today. I do feel, not every day and on a bad day, I'm not great at it, but it's remarkable. And, I still, there's so much that, so many defects of character that continue to show up in my life. People pleasing is a particular I call it people pleasing. It's actually approval seeking. I'm not actually trying to people please. I just want your approval. I don't care whether I'm pleasing you. Just approve of me, please. The approval seeking thing. I had this, a very powerful example of it recently. I was, at a group that was my home group, and I was, approval seeking, someone that I like there, and I said something that was, I was trying to make a joke, one of those awkward jokes that you make when you're around someone that you want to like you, and I said it, and it was really harsh and hurtful, and then I had that horrible experience of desperately trying to backtrack from it, and knowing that I was just making it worse and worse and worse, and it was just horrendous. And I went home from the meeting, and I lay, I haven't experienced this for a long time, but I lay there in complete self-obsession at 28 years sober, because I said something to someone in a meeting that wasn't very kind, and it did my head in. And then I got my phone out and sent an email. Not a good thing at 2:00 in the morning. Trying to make amends. Didn't run it by anyone, didn't talk to anyone about it, just sent the email, and I think it made it worse. And of course I didn't get a response. And then I had to sit with it, that discomfort and that feeling. It was horrible, and it just reminded me, that I shouldn't go into my head alone. I need to bring someone in, especially when it's that crazy. And eventually, I was able to work through that with the person, and they gave me that approval I was seeking and said they were okay. But I was transported back to that feeling of, just how completely self-absorbed I can be when things don't turn out the way I hope they will. There's been a lot in the last 28 years that I feel a deep sense of peace around today, and I do actually, God has done for me what I couldn't do for myself and relieved me of the bondage of self. I don't think about myself all the time anymore. I don't, I spend a lot of time thinking about others, and that's a really good place to be. I look after myself, but I don't need to think about myself a lot. I need to think of others. I need to share my experience and strength and hope with others. And when I do that, and when I do that actively, my experience is that I have mostly peace in my life. But it's not every day, and that's why I was saying to a friend of mine last night, I hope I never have to show up here recovered from all of my defects of character, and I hope that I can be honest and vulnerable with people whenever I share about that stuff, because it makes it okay. When I hear you share that stuff, it makes it okay for me too. And I think that's all I've got, so thanks.
Okay, I'm going to thank our fabulous 3 speakers that we had here today. So thank you so much to Beck and Chris and Jodie, sharing their experience on steps 8 and 9. I would like to hand over to Darren, the MC, who will take us out. Thank you all for coming along. Thank you, Darren. I was tossing up. Thank you.
Wow, 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 wow. Whew. Thank you, Beck, Chris and Jodie. It was 2002 when our eyes locked. It was a great meeting. I was on the rego desk. For those of you who were at service, something may have happened today. If you're on the rego desk, you may get a phone call in the next few days like I did. In fact, it was an email, and the email said, "Hi Darren, it's Jodie. We met at the convention last weekend, and we're forming the next Newipar Convention Committee, and I was wondering whether you'd like to be on it." And I took it to I printed it at home, and I drove it around to my sponsor's house, and I read it to him, and I said, "Do you think she likes me?" He goes, "How would I know?" Monique called his wife. I read it to Monique, and she said, "Oh yeah. Oh yeah." So this could happen for you too. 3 announcements. Please wear your lanyards. The opening ceremony of the 80th anniversary of Alcoholics Anonymous in Australia, the 59th annual convention of AA, will be opening here at 7 p.m. tonight. Please try and get in the room by like 6:45, 6:50, because we've got maybe 1,000 people trying to get seated here tonight. We still have dinner dance tickets available for tomorrow night as well, which you can purchase at the registration desk. So please go and grab those. And with that, I'll hand it back to Shaz. We are in Australia. Shaz. And to close with the Serenity Prayer.
To a God of your own understanding, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Keep coming back. Thank you, Daz.